Hey there guys, so I've been messing around with the newest version of the AMD APU Tuning Utility, and this new build is completely redone compared to the old one. So there are some major visual changes as you can see here, and some streamlining, though there are certain things that kind of annoy me. Now instead of the usual presets that they pretty much have these right here that are just based off of those names. They really won't tell you what TDP or what anything is being changed, but really overall, I do like a lot of the things here, especially because here you can just go directly for the Ryzen Adjust GitHub and actually get this very extensive wiki. And this is actually what the APU tuning utility is actually using for all of that. Really what the tuning utility mostly is just a user interface for this tool itself. And really almost any AMD tool is based off of this. But if we jump over to the actual GitHub for the AMD tuning utility right here, you can see that this is the most recent version, and you can see when exactly it was that they actually changed to this new design. I do actually like it a lot compared to the old one, though I do just hate the fact that those default presets just don't tell you a TDP target anymore. But it is simplified to the point now where I feel like a lot of just general users can use this effectively, but you do need to pay attention to your temperatures. If we actually just click over here and go back to the page that has the presets, we'll be able to actually see what we have here. We have battery saver, balance, performance, and find your device presets. That one at this point is currently pretty much useless because they hardly have any presets submitted currently. But at least in my testing, I've found that the battery saver sets the TDP to 8 watts, balance sets it to 25, and performance pretty much seems to target either 30 or 35. I'm not 100% sure, but one thing you have to remember is to go to the settings here and set the auto reapply so that the TDP doesn't get reset. But setting this up is really a lot easier than the older version. Now, if we look at Cinebench R23 running right here and we look at hardware info 64, you can see that the actual CPU package power is at currently 31 watts, actually almost at 32 watts. And really, we're sucking down a lot of power here, and that's producing a lot of heat. The APU pretty much at this point is just not really going to be able to keep up with the heat being produced in a sustained situation like this. The temperature limit is pretty much set at 95 watts, and we're at that. So at this point, this is pretty much where the CPU is going to start reducing the wattage to try to keep temperatures down so that they don't reach above that 95C. So at least with the Aero 13, I really don't recommend using this unless you're going to be doing very specific workloads. I certainly wouldn't rock it like this for day to day, especially if you're on battery. But if you have a render job that you have to do, I mean, having the increase in performance is pretty nice, because if we actually look at the Cinebench scores compared to where we were at the 15 watts versus the essentially 30 watts, it was a 2,000 point uplift. So overall, it is a pretty decent uplift in terms of performance, at least on the CPU side. But really, what does this translate to, at least in terms of gaming? So we're going to be taking a look at two games here. It's going to be Far Cry 6, and we're going to be taking a look at CSGO. I wanted to test out those two games because I want one that is really CPU heavy and another one that is GPU heavy, to really see if there's any uplift that ends up happening from this, and if it would be worth potentially risking cooking your system to potentially get this level of performance. Now, we already know the answer to that is no, but it is a hypothetical in this situation, so I'm going to pretty much be running this in temperatures that I would consider to be unsafe for real day-to-day use. So first off, on the left here, we have it at the stock setting, and on the right here, we're running it at the battery saver mode, which, as you can see, sets TDP to 8 watts. Now, the most surprising thing here is how not completely terrible it is. Like, it's a surprising amount of performance considering we're pretty much using half of the stock TDP wattage. Now, it's not a playable experience at all, and you can definitely see a reduction in FPS, but it has me interested now because let's say you're playing a game like Stardew Valley on here. Well, I mean, you don't need the full 15 watt TDP. Maybe just blocking it to 8 and not even letting the system go any higher than that could give you some pretty decent battery life. Though you can definitely see that the performance impact here is going to make this a very rough experience. And even though the averages are around 30, the 1% lows are at a range where it's just not really playable. Now at the balance preset, things start to look a little bit interesting. Now we're running at what is essentially a target of 25 watts. And we're seeing a bump in the 1% lows and the averages, but it's so minuscule. It's really not going to make much of a difference. And look at the huge difference in temperature that we're running at now. I mean, this is pretty much a whole lot more heat for not a lot more performance at all. And this isn't too surprising if you've paid attention to how AMD has been really focusing on their mobile strategy, where it's really focused on efficiency. So the chips, you're already getting them at a very, very efficient point for performance per watt. So the diminishing returns that we actually end up hitting when we go into higher wattages are pretty major. I mean, we're talking about, in the best case scenario, maybe a 10 to 15% uplift for a huge increase in heat. And speaking of huge increase in heat, here is the extreme profile. So this is going to be where it's going to go for the highest level of performance by setting the wattage to what I think is either 30 or 35. I mean, it's currently hitting around 32, but it's really going to fluctuate specifically because of the heat, because we are now reaching into the 90 degrees, and it is set to essentially go for a temperature limit of 95 degrees. So it's pretty much going to start to reduce the power to try to keep the temperatures within reason. Really, the biggest winner in this is the fact that the 1% lows do see a bump up to 30, because that does smooth out the experience pretty decently here, honestly. But you're just pushing so much heat through the system that I don't think this is worth it at all. So it really seems that for that game, it's just not really worth it. But moving on to CSGO, here you can see some gameplay of a bot match because of the fact that the game does not really support third-party overlays like MSI Afterburner without disabling a lot of multiplayer stuff. But at the stock 15 watt TDP, we're pretty much reaching some pretty decent averages in terms of going up into the 120 FPS range, but the 1% lows of 40 aren't exactly the greatest, though they're not the worst either. It could definitely be a rough experience in certain situations, but overall it's fully playable. And if you don't have that FPS counter, you're really not going to be paying attention to this at all. But we'll see what the other presets actually end up doing, and if maybe we can squeeze out a little bit more performance, maybe improve those 1% lows a bit. We'll see. Starting off, of course, we're going to go with the battery saver preset. Now with the battery saver preset, I was actually genuinely surprised to see that we were getting that high of an average. Now the 1% lows do take a noticeable hit here and there, and really all it means is that we have this constant stutter that ends up happening, though it's not anything that's super noticeable. You will see it in the frame time charts there. You'll see those consistent spikes that end up happening, but really it is a lot more playable than I was expecting for something that is just running at 8 watts. That's kind of crazy. I mean, that really just means that you could make such an efficient little emulation station with one of these chips. You'd get so many cores to just mess around with, where you could be doing emulation and it could honestly be like a virtualization machine, and you would be eating practically no power at all. I mean, this is honestly really impressive, though this is really impractical. I wouldn't realistically expect you to play at least this game like this. This really just seems to be designed for like super light indie titles. In that situation, this would honestly be really awesome, especially because you get really good battery life like this. But now let's look at the presets where you would realistically use them to try to play this game. Now here we have the balanced preset, which is running it at 25 watts. Now the 1% lows that we're getting here are really decent compared to where we were at before. I mean, we're almost at a pretty much 60 FPS 1% low. The averages are very decent, though we're not reaching really any higher than when we were at the stock. It's mostly just smoothing out the experience, and it really does feel nicer to play overall, though it's nothing earth-shattering. I wouldn't say that this is a game-changing experience or anything like that. You'll see that the 1% lows will just drop down a bit in the loading section as soon as you spawn in, but they'll level out and just pick back up as the gameplay proceeds. So overall, it's a good experience. It's not that different from where we were at the stock TDP though. So overall, decent uplift, but nothing incredible, nothing amazing. Not really worth the increase in heat for the most part, but it is nice. Really, it's at the extreme preset where we start to see at least a little bit more of an improvement in the 1% lows, where they're now above 60 most of the time. You're really rarely going to see any major dips or anything like that. It'll usually only happen when you load in, and then past that, once you're actually in the game, things will level out and you're going to have a very, very smooth experience like this. But those temperatures are pretty brutal. And I think this really mostly just comes down to the fact that that CPU is now reaching some pretty decently high clock speeds, while the GPU is also able to stay at max speed. So overall, this is a very, very big win. I honestly was really impressed with how this was performing. You know, again, you'll see the 1% lows dropped there because of loading in, but as you play the game, things will level out. But overall, I think that you should definitely give this a go, try it out. I was very pleasantly surprised to see that it was actually able to raise the TDP on the HP Pavilion Aero 13, because I couldn't in the older versions. So this new version actually works with it. It seems to have had some updated stuff for Zen 3 CPUs in general. So again, look through the wiki if you really want to go in depth with all of this. They have so much info, but they did simplify things enough here that almost anyone can just pick this up and just try out those default presets. Again, the only thing that I wish they would add is the fact that it would tell you what TDP it's going to set things to, just so that you know, because there are plenty of people out there that are going to have systems that will not have the cooling capabilities for those higher presets, and they might risk damaging some equipment. It'd be nice to at least have something there that like gives you a tangible number to at least potentially be afraid of. But anyways, I will catch you in the next one.